Have you ever been in a conversation that felt off, but you couldn't explain why? You walk away anxious, your thoughts spinning, your chest tight, but there were no insults, no yelling, nothing technically wrong. That's how emotional manipulation works. It isn't always obvious. It's not always loud, but it is always disorienting. Some women stay in these dynamics for years, blaming themselves, wondering if they're the problem, if they're just too sensitive, if love is supposed to feel this heavy. But the truth is this: emotional manipulation is subtle and often socially acceptable. It hides in casual phrases, in quiet power games, in smiling faces that twist your reality without ever raising their voice. And by the time you recognize it, it's already rewritten the way you see yourself. This is where the sovereign queen begins her initiation. Because before you can reclaim your throne, you must name the spells that have kept you silent. The first red flag is gaslighting. Not the dramatic version from movies, the real kind, the subtle kind. It begins with phrases like, "You're remembering it wrong. That's not what I meant, you're twisting my words. Wow, I can't believe you'd think that about me." Suddenly, you're questioning your perception. You feel guilty for being hurt. You apologize, even when you're the one bleeding. Jung called this the projection of the manipulator's unconscious onto you. When they refuse to face their shadow, they make it your burden. They distort reality so they don't have to take responsibility. And if you're a woman with empathy, with emotional sensitivity, you're the perfect mirror for their shame, their confusion, their chaos. But here's the truth: your emotions are data. Your intuition is ancient. Your nervous system doesn't lie. The sovereign queen listens to that inner voice, even when it contradicts the one across the table. The second red flag is inconsistency masked as intensity. This is the classic hot and cold pattern. One moment they're all in, overflowing with affection, promises, passion. The next they pull away, distant, cold, dismissive. You're left scrambling to fix it, to get back to the good version of them. But the truth, the inconsistency, is the manipulation. It keeps you in a cycle of anxiety and reward. It teaches your nervous system to associate love with instability. This is not chemistry, it's conditioning. Your trauma bond is not romance. It's a nervous system trapped in survival mode. And the longer you stay, the deeper the pattern etches into your body. You stop trusting peace. You start mistaking intensity for intimacy. But a queen doesn't chase crumbs. She doesn't romanticize chaos. She knows that real love is consistent. Not perfect, but present. The third red flag is disguised control. This one is insidious. It shows up in the name of love. "I just want to protect you. I'm only saying this because I care. You shouldn't hang out with them. They don't understand you like I do." At first it feels sweet, intimate. But soon your world starts to shrink. Your choices are questioned. Your relationships are policed. Your identity becomes tied to their comfort. You become easier to manage, easier to predict. And the worst part, you may think this is what love looks like. Especially if you were raised to believe love meant sacrifice, obedience, making others feel safe at your own expense. But here's the truth. Love does not require your surrender. Care does not demand your obedience. Protection is not the same as possession. The sovereign queen does not confuse cages for castles. She knows the difference between support and surveillance. The fourth red flag is emotional responsibility reversal. You find yourself constantly managing their feelings, making excuses for their behavior, soothing their outbursts, shrinking your truth to keep the peace. They make you responsible for their reactions, their moods, their wounds. If they lash out, it's because you pushed them. If they withdraw, it's because you weren't supportive enough. If they disrespect you, it's because you made them feel insecure. This is emotional labor theft. You are not their mother, their therapist, their dumping ground. You are a woman, a sovereign being. And it is not your job to regulate the emotions of someone who refuses to regulate themselves. This is the final awakening, to see that the red flags were never vague. They were always there. You were simply trained to look away. But no more. Because now you recognize the tactics. You understand the cycles. And you are reclaiming your peace. The sovereign queen doesn't wait for someone to change. She doesn't beg for clarity. She doesn't argue with distortion. She sees, she decides, she exits. This is emotional intelligence in action. The courage to trust your perception. The strength to choose yourself. The power to walk away from anything that confuses love with control. So ask yourself, where have you ignored the red flags because you wanted the connection so badly? Which of these patterns have been normalized in your past? And what would shift in your life if you no longer tolerated even a whisper of manipulation? Some wounds don't bleed, they echo. They echo through your choices, through the people you attract, through the silence you keep in rooms that steal your voice. That is the invisible cost of emotional manipulation, not just the pain itself, but the pattern it creates. When you've lived in distortion long enough, truth feels like rebellion. The sovereign queen archetype knows this intimately. She is not born, she is forged, in the furnace of betrayal, in the loneliness of clarity, in the sacred moment when she realizes peace is not given, it is chosen, and it often costs the very things she thought she couldn't live without. Let's go deeper into these red flags, not just as behaviors, but as archetypal energies, shadow forms, energetic imprints that shape the way we relate and the way we disappear inside relationships that promise everything but deliver only confusion. Gaslighting at its root is the denial of your inner world. It is the shadow of the trickster, an archetype that weaponizes language to distort reality. When someone gaslights you, they are not simply lying. They are attempting to colonize your truth. In Jungian terms, this is the projection of their own unintegrated chaos. They cannot accept their own guilt, fear, or shame, so they convince you it belongs to you. But here's what they don't anticipate: that the queen remembers. Maybe not with words, but with sensation, with the tightening in her throat when something is off, with the ache in her chest when her reality is denied. She doesn't need to justify. She doesn't need to argue. She trusts what her body already knows. Inconsistency masked as intensity is the mark of the wounded magician, the one who enchants with emotion, only to vanish without explanation. They offer dreams, then withdraw affection, creating a cycle where your nervous system confuses instability with passion. It is not love, it is trauma. Love doesn't feel like adrenaline, it feels like oxygen. Jung taught that what is unconscious in us will appear outside as fate. This is how women repeat patterns, drawn to the same emotional roller coaster in different forms, until they recognize that what feels familiar may simply be what was first, not what is right. So ask yourself, who benefits when you confuse chaos for chemistry. Disguised control is the shadow of the protector, a noble archetype twisted by fear. This control may wear the mask of care, but underneath it seeks possession. It offers safety only to demand compliance. This is where many women get caught, because the language sounds sweet. The concern feels real, but real care liberates, it doesn't restrict. The sovereign queen sees the difference. She recognizes when love starts to shrink her, when her friendships are framed as threats, when her choices are subtly undermined. She knows that devotion does not require obedience, and she walks away from anyone who demands her submission in exchange for affection. Emotional responsibility reversal is the most exhausting tactic. It is the shadow of the caretaker, a dynamic where one partner holds all the emotional weight. You become the emotional sponge, the shock absorber, the fixer, the forgiver. And if you don't comply, you are labeled cold, selfish, unreasonable. This is not a relationship. It is an energetic drain, a one-way channel where your empathy is mined and your needs are dismissed. But empathy without boundaries is exploitation. The queen no longer abandons herself to prove her loyalty. She knows that the right person won't need to be convinced of her worth. She knows her value isn't in how much she can endure, but in how clearly she can discern what is no longer hers to carry. This is individuation, the process Jung described as becoming whole. It is not about perfection. It is about integration, about meeting the shadow, about realizing that what you tolerated wasn't love, it was your inner child begging not to be abandoned. But you are not that child anymore. You do not need to earn love by erasing yourself. You do not need to stay where your truth is questioned. You do not need to explain why your peace matters more than their chaos. The queen does not negotiate her clarity. She listens deeply, moves wisely, walks quietly when the door closes. So ask yourself, where have you been carrying emotional burdens that were never yours? What would it feel like to live without second-guessing your truth? Are you ready to stop managing their emotions and start honoring your own? When you grow up walking on eggshells, you learn to whisper your needs. You learn to anticipate moods, shrink yourself before conflict, offer apologies for things that were never your fault. This isn't kindness, it's survival. But the truth is, what helped you survive can slowly kill your spirit. Emotional manipulation doesn't always arrive as cruelty. Sometimes it arrives as praise, as adoration, as attention so intense it leaves you breathless. But breathless doesn't mean safe. One of the most powerful manipulative dynamics is love bombing, not because it looks like harm, but because it looks like everything you've ever wanted: attention, validation, the feeling of finally being seen. In Jungian terms, this is the projection of your inner longing onto an external figure. They appear to mirror your hopes, your values, your ideals. But what's being mirrored is not your truth, it's your wound. The wound of not feeling enough. The wound of needing to prove your worth through sacrifice. And the manipulator becomes the mirror that reflects only what you hope to see, until you mistake illusion for intimacy. The sovereign queen no longer confuses intensity for connection. She knows that fast affection without foundation is a trap. She waits, she watches, she listens to how someone moves, not just how they speak. Because love isn't how someone rushes in, it's how they remain when the mask falls. Behind love bombing often lies future faking, promises without substance, plans without presence, words designed to hook your heart without building a foundation of trust. This dynamic exploits the feminine energy of vision, of possibility, of dreaming into the future. But dreams without action are just distractions. The queen no longer invests in potential. She chooses presence. She doesn't mistake big promises for real commitment. She knows that anyone can write poetry in the first chapter, but only the aligned can co-author a life. Beneath all these patterns is a deeper shadow, power through confusion. Manipulators thrive on keeping you emotionally off balance. They rewrite stories, distort timelines, switch narratives. One day you're adored, the next dismissed. You start to doubt your memory, your reactions, your worth. This is psychological erosion, not through violence, but through subtle erosion of self. It's why gaslighting works. It's why breadcrumbing hurts, because it doesn't take your power all at once. It chips away until your reflection no longer feels like home. But there is a sacred rebellion in stillness. When you stop chasing clarity from someone committed to your confusion, you reclaim your center. This is stoic power, the ability to remain grounded in your own truth, no matter the storm around you. The sovereign queen is not swayed by emotional weather. She observes, she detaches, she protects her inner temple not out of fear but out of wisdom. Because boundaries are not walls, they are gates, and not everyone is meant to pass through. This is where emotional intelligence becomes self-preservation. You no longer decode mixed signals. You respond to consistency. You no longer plead for understanding. You speak your truth once, and if it is dismissed, you walk. This doesn't make you harsh, it makes you whole. To individuate, in Jung's words, is to become who you truly are, not who others expect you to be. It means facing the parts of you that once accepted crumbs and asking why. It means holding space for the version of you that stayed too long, not with shame, but with compassion. Because survival strategies are not flaws, they are evidence of your strength, but now they are no longer needed. Now you choose discernment over devotion. Now you choose your nervous system over nostalgia. Now you choose reality over projection, no matter how beautiful the fantasy once was. So ask yourself, what are you still hoping they'll say to finally feel enough? What are you still tolerating in the name of love that feels more like silence? What would your life look like if your boundaries were treated as sacred? There comes a moment when you no longer seek closure from them. You seek clarity within. You stop asking why they changed or why it hurt so much to stay. You start asking why you stayed after the first time your intuition whispered, "This doesn't feel like love." Because emotional manipulation rarely announces itself. It disguises itself in your programming, in your attachment wounds, in your inherited beliefs about what love should cost. And this is where the next red flag lives, the redefinition of your reality. It doesn't begin with screaming or insults. It begins with the subtle erosion of your perception. A joke at your expense, a denial of your feelings, a contradiction of your memory. You say, "That hurt me." They say, "You're too sensitive." You say, "That's not what happened." They say, "You always twist things." This is gaslighting, not just an argument, but a strategic distortion of your emotional compass. In Jungian language, this is the shadow in its most insidious form, not as a villain you can see, but as an unseen force that makes you question your own sanity. The queen does not argue with distortion. She recognizes the and chooses silence over chaos. Because what you argue with, you feed. And some people don't want peace. They want dominance through disorientation. This is where your individuation begins. Not by confronting them, but by no longer betraying yourself to keep the peace. Because when you are gaslit long enough, you start to internalize the voice of the manipulator. It becomes your own inner critic, your own self-doubt. You question your decisions. You justify their behavior. You explain your pain away. But that voice isn't you. It's the echo of powerlessness. And once you recognize it, you begin the process of reclaiming authority over your inner world. The Stoics teach, you cannot control others, only how you interpret and respond to them. So the queen becomes a mirror, not a sponge. She reflects manipulation back to its source. She no longer absorbs false guilt or twisted logic. This emotional detachment is not cold. It's sovereign. Because when love becomes a battlefield for power, the most radical act is to choose peace, even if it means walking away. The third red flag is this: when your boundaries become the problem. Healthy love respects no. Manipulative love sees no as a challenge. You set a line. They step over it, laugh, or push until you're too tired to resist. You ask for space. They accuse you of abandonment. You ask for respect. They say you're demanding. This isn't intimacy. It's control. And the moment your limits are seen as threats, you're no longer in a relationship, you're in a power struggle. Jung taught that the journey to selfhood demands confrontation with the shadow. And this includes the shadow of pleasing, the inherited belief that love must be earned through sacrifice. But the sovereign queen doesn't trade selfhood for connection. She knows that every no is a sacred yes to herself. Boundaries are not rejection. They are truth. And anyone who cannot honor your truth is not aligned with your peace. So the question becomes, where have you been betraying your boundaries to avoid abandonment? Who taught you that love was about endurance instead of alignment? Because love that asks you to betray yourself is not love. It's dependency. It's fear. It's bondage dressed as belonging. And you are not here to be kept. You are here to be met. You are not here to beg for space in someone's life. You are here to claim your own. So when the red flags whisper, don't wait for them to scream. Trust the subtle shifts. Trust your discomfort. Trust your rise. There's a silence that's heavier than words. It happens when you begin to withdraw, not out of resentment, but out of revelation. Because once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. The fourth red flag isn't loud. It's not in what they say, but in what you stop saying. You begin to censor yourself. You walk on eggshells. You rehearse conversations in your head before speaking. Why? Because deep down, your body already knows that honesty will be punished. This is the red flag of self-erasure, when you begin editing your truth to preserve the relationship. You don't cry when you're hurt. You don't say no when you're overwhelmed. You don't speak your needs because the backlash isn't worth it. This is not love. This is performance. And performance is exhausting. You become a character in your own life. One who smiles, agrees, appeases. One who forgets what it means to feel safe just being. Jung spoke of the persona, the mask we wear to survive in society. But when the mask becomes your relationship identity, you lose access to your soul. The queen removes the mask, not to expose herself, but to reclaim herself. Because the woman who hides her feelings to stay close to someone ends up losing herself in the process. And it always starts subtly. You tell yourself, I'll just avoid that topic. I won't bring this up tonight. I'll keep it light so they won't pull away. But the cost adds up. And one day, you look in the mirror and realize the woman looking back is a stranger to her own voice. Self-abandonment is the slowest form of heartbreak. The truth is, real love requires risk. The risk of being seen. The risk of being misunderstood. The risk of being you. And when someone punishes you for your authenticity, they are not protecting the bond. They are protecting their control. That's why silence is not always peace. Sometimes it's compliance. Sometimes it's survival. But survival is not your destiny. The Stoics taught, if you want to be free, you must first learn to speak freely. Even if your voice shakes. Even if it changes everything. Even if they leave. Because the people who love your mask will never love your truth. And your truth is not a burden. It's the gateway to your liberation. You are not here to be agreeable. You are not here to be manageable. You are here to be whole. So the fourth red flag is this: when the space between you and your truth becomes too wide to cross without fear. And now you know what that feels like. So what do you do with this knowledge? You stop trying to fix them. You stop negotiating with dysfunction. You stop making excuses for harm because you understand their trauma. Understanding trauma does not mean tolerating abuse. Compassion is not submission. Empathy does not require endurance. And love does not mean losing yourself. You choose discernment over loyalty. You choose inner peace over external validation. You choose self-trust over emotional chaos. The queen does not abandon her intuition. She builds her empire on it. You're not here to be tested endlessly. You're here to be seen clearly. So let these red flags be what they are. Signals that your soul is calling you back. To clarity. To sovereignty. To truth. Now ask yourself gently, where have I been quiet to keep the peace? And what would happen if I chose peace within instead? There comes a moment in every woman's life when silence is no longer self-protection, it's self-betrayal. A moment when the cost of shrinking, of tolerating, of bending yourself into shapes just to be loved becomes too great. That moment is not loud. It's not dramatic. It's often born in quiet realizations. In a late-night ache that says, I don't recognize myself anymore. In a conversation where your voice trembles, not from fear, but from finally speaking what you've always known. This is the beginning of liberation. And liberation doesn't always look like walking away with fire in your eyes. Sometimes it looks like not explaining yourself, not begging to be understood, not performing worthiness for someone who profits from your confusion. Sometimes it's just standing in a room with someone who used to control you and realizing you feel nothing but clarity. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And now you've made it conscious. You see the emotional manipulation. You see the power games masked as love. You see the imbalance, the one that made you feel small just to keep the peace. What you felt was real. What you feared, your intuition already knew. The gaslighting couldn't erase your knowing. It only made you question your right to it. But you're done doubting your own perception. Because the truth doesn't scream. It doesn't plead. It doesn't twist itself to be believed. The truth just is. And now so are you. You no longer need to win someone over to validate your worth. You no longer confuse chaos with passion, distance with mystery, silence with safety. You are the safe space you've been waiting for. That's emotional intelligence. Not reacting from wounds, but responding from wisdom. Not abandoning yourself to preserve illusions, but honoring your boundaries without apology. You begin to recognize patterns faster. You no longer chase clarity from people who thrive in confusion. You let the manipulators fumble when their tactics no longer land. You stop arguing with people committed to misunderstanding you. You learn that walking away is not weakness, it's self-respect. And in time, you find new kinds of love. Love that listens without interrogation. Love that doesn't punish your emotions. Love that doesn't require self-erasure for connection. Because you've changed your frequency. You no longer attract what resonates with your wounds. You attract what resonates with your healing. And that's the gift of individuation, the Jungian path to becoming whole. Not perfect, not pleasing, but whole. You integrate your shadow. You reclaim your voice. You unlearn the belief that love should hurt, confuse, or control. You remember that discernment is love in action. That sovereignty is not isolation, it's sacred self-unity. And that being alone, when you're aligned, feels better than being enmeshed when you're unseen. So when you look back at the red flags now, don't regret not seeing them sooner. You weren't blind. You were learning. You were surviving with the tools you had. But now you choose differently. And that choice, moment by moment, boundary by boundary, is how you return to yourself. The woman who reclaims her emotional clarity will terrify those who depended on her confusion. Let them be terrified. You are not here to soothe their fear. You are here to embody your truth. Now tell the world, where did you finally say enough? What moment brought you back to yourself? Share it in the comments below. Because every story of awakening gives another woman permission to begin hers. The woman who sees the truth chooses her peace.